Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something darker than usual. Turn off the lights, maybe keep one candle burning, and let's begin tonight's haunting together. You're curled up, maybe with headphones on, as the rain whispers against your window, and the city's power hums low. A dull vibration you barely notice until it stops. You know that quiet, right? The kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like a heavy blanket pressing down on your chest. We're going deep into the heart of the Obsidian Rail Depot, a place where I've spent the last 10 years of my life. And trust me, it's not just the schedule boards that flicker here. This is where I start my mornings, stepping into the pre-dawn dark, the floor still radiating the night's chill, and unlocking the main ticketing office. It's peaceful, deceptively so, just the distant rumble of maintenance, crews in the deep tunnels, and the wet slap hiss of a janitor's mop echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. If you hear knocking behind you right now, or maybe the faint tap-tap of a dropped coin, just ignore it, okay? Probably just the wind, or maybe it's the guy who forgot his change the other day. Bad luck, that. So, before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you're brave enough to handle what's coming. Tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, turn off the lights. Maybe keep one candle burning. And let's begin tonight's haunting together. You might think selling tickets is boring. Most people just slide their money through the slot, ask for a return or a single, barely looking up from their phones. You hand over the thermal paper, they grab it, and they're gone, already lost in the thought of their destination. But here, the job is mostly about watching people, not in a creepy way, just observing their stories. You see the guy in the rumpled suit staring at the departure board. Bad day at the office, maybe. The woman gripping her worn leather suitcase too tightly. Is she running towards something or desperately fleeing? The way their eyes linger a second too long on the schedule. The way they grip their bags, like they're holding on to the last thing they own. It all speaks volumes. I used to share these imagined stories at the pub with my friends, and they'd joke that I should be a writer. But I never told them the real stories, the ones that aren't made up. You see, the Obsidian Rail Depot is not a normal place. It's a nexus, always busy, always moving. Thousands pass through every day, but they don't work here. They don't stay. That's the difference. When you stop rushing, when you let the station's strange, heavy stillness settle around you, you begin to notice the things that don't fit. This land was never meant for steel and concrete. Long ago, when the city was new, a terrible sickness swept through, a pandemic that refused to fade. The dead piled up faster than the living could mourn or bury them. Morgues overflowed, cemeteries were sealed, and the desperate city leaders did what they had to. They dug deep trenches, mass graves, bodies stacked like kindling, covered quickly with earth, hoping to contain the blight. This entire hub, this sprawling transit center, is literally built on a foundation of forgotten dead. The builders paved over it, laying concrete thick and heavy, like a vast coffin lid. It was history, sealed up, forgotten. But as anyone who deals with paranormal phenomena knows, the earth remembers trauma, especially when it involves mass, unquiet death. The concept of the genius loci, the spirit of place, suggests that intense human emotions, particularly fear and suffering, can be imprinted onto the physical location itself. Researchers still argue whether the trauma of the land itself influences hauntings. But here, the weight is undeniable. Bad things have always happened at the depot, but management just files it away as human error or misplaced records. The workers, the ones who stay late, the ones who clean the tunnels, we know better. We share the real stories in the break room over lukewarm coffee or over a pint at the pub. You're stuck here now. Your train is running late, so let me tell you about the rules. The first one is simple, and it concerns the first entity you might meet when the night gets deep. Section 2. The atmosphere in the depot shifts entirely once the last express train pulls out around 1 o'clock a.m. The echoing chaos of the day is replaced by a low electrical thrum and a deep silence that feels like it has teeth. That's when the headless watchman begins his rounds. The old-timers call him that, and his story is a legend whispered among the night staff. It goes back decades, long before my time. He was a track worker, routine night shift, checking the rails for stress fractures and debris. They never figured out exactly what happened, but the guess is he leaned over the rail at the wrong moment, maybe dropped a critical tool. A late-running service train came through, too fast and unforgiving. They found his body near the tracks, uniform torn and soiled, one arm still outstretched as if searching for something in the dark. But his head was gone, not crushed or mangled, just clean gone. And they never found it. Not in the tunnels, not by the rails, not anywhere in the sprawling complex. The depot shut down for a month, officially for safety upgrades. Unofficially, it was to smother the scandal, to keep the press and their relentless cameras away. His family was paid off, silenced, a freak accident, they were told. But the watchman comes back. He is bound to the tracks, still carrying out his shift. He always looks the same, the faded, old uniform of the depot, and he holds a heavy brass gas lantern. The flame inside is small, a sickly yellow flicker that barely casts light onto the ground. He doesn't wail or clank chains, that's for movies. He just walks, slow and deliberate, searching the rails and the empty concrete. He sticks to the abandoned utility corridors and the platforms where the public never goes. And that brings us to the first rule. It's the most vital rule for anyone working the late shift. It's not written on any official memo, but you learn it quickly in the break room. You must acknowledge the headless watchman. Not much is needed, just a brief, quick greeting. A nod, a low mumbled evening, or a quick wave. It doesn't matter what you say, only that you say something. The reason the terrifying logic of this haunting is simple. He still believes he's human. He is caught in a loop of his final shift. And if you treat him like a fellow colleague, a normal part of the late-night work crew, he keeps searching for his missing piece. You don't want him to stop believing that he's still one of us. Because if he ever realizes he isn't, if he realizes he's a phantom, something that doesn't belong in this realm, none of us want to know what happens next. The thought of what a spirit might do once its final delusion shatters. It's a chilling psychological concept, mirroring the idea of the doppelganger effect in some German folklore, where encountering your exact double is a harbinger of death, a direct confrontation with your own non-existence. It's about the spirit realizing its own liminal state. Most travelers never see him. The depot is too loud during the day, too frantic with the rush of crowds and announcements, but between 9 o'clock p.m. and 3 o'clock a.m., when the barrier between here and there is thinnest, that's when he walks. I've known cleaners who caught a flicking light in the periphery, station guards who watched that dim lantern move steadily down a dark track. He never speaks first, never acknowledges you. He just keeps scanning the ground, the walls, the abandoned stairwells. The rule is simple, almost absurdly easy, but its violation carries the highest price. You might hear people say, "Oh, it's just superstition," or "They're just trying to scare the new guy." That's what one of the new hires, a kid named Mark, thought a few years back. He worked the baggage handling and platform maintenance, the kind of guy who laughed at ghost stories and rolled his eyes at any mention of the strange rules. The older workers warned him gently, sharing the same story I'm telling you now. They said, "Just nod, Mark. Say good evening. It costs you nothing." But he was a skeptic, convinced it was an elaborate practical joke. One late night, between 2 and 3 a.m., he was finishing up his sweep on one of the deserted outer platforms. He saw the inevitable, the distinct, sickly flicker of the gas lantern down the track. Mark didn't panic. Instead, he made a conscious choice. He sneered under his breath, turned his back to the light, and kept his head down, pretending to be absorbed in his work. He didn't offer the simple, required greeting. He chose silence, and that was his mistake. He never finished his shift. They found him later, slumped near the tracks, just as if he'd simply sat down to rest for a moment. His uniform was perfectly neat, his hands resting quietly in his lap. But his head was gone, cleanly removed. The older staff, the ones who had warned him, knew instantly. This was no train accident. The body was untouched. The search that followed was frantic. Police, security, and maintenance crews scoured every inch of the depot, the tunnels, the platforms, the storage rooms, even the ventilation shafts. The missing head was nowhere near the body. It was a full-scale mystery that management desperately tried to contain, locking down the station for the rest of the night. The chilling final reveal came 2 days later. Another worker, looking for a spare, clean uniform, opened a locker in the remote staff break room. Wedged between a folded jacket and a pair of worn work boots, there it was. Mark's head, his eyes were wide, and his mouth was frozen open. A silent testament to the moment. He must have finally realized the truth, that the ghost stories weren't jokes. The psychological horror of finding the head far removed from the body speaks to a deep, unsettling intelligence in the entity. It reminds me of the medieval folklore concerning restless spirits, particularly those of the violently deceased, who were often said to be tied to the world by an unresolved physical state. They weren't just wandering, they were completing a grim, self-imposed duty, and anyone who interfered became part of that duty. The official response was minimal. No deep investigation, no news reports, just a rapid, silent cleanup. They hired a replacement quickly, and the unspoken rule was cemented. No one questions the headless watchman again. He doesn't ask for a complex ritual. He asks for a simple, quick acknowledgement, a gesture that says, "Yes, I see you. You are still one of us, and you better believe it." Because as long as he maintains that delusion, he remains a benign presence, simply looking for his lost piece. You have to be careful with the dead. They listen, they wait, and if you refuse to see them, they will make sure you are seen, or rather, that you see them in the worst possible way. The watchman patrols the tunnels, a chilling but avoidable presence, but there is another entity here, one that demands respect not through fear, but through absolute, unsettling proximity. Most people never notice it, simply because it's engineered to blend in perfectly with the chaos of the day. It stands right in the main intersection, the crossroads of shadow, where the walkway converges and the massive departure boards hang overhead. I'm talking about the bear. The big red bear. Travelers, thousands of them a day, stream past it without a second thought. They assume it's a piece of weird public art, an absurd, oversized teddy bear, bright crimson, standing awkwardly on its hind legs. Its gigantic arms are stretched out wide, like it's waiting for the world's most uncomfortable hug. Its massive, stitched head nearly scrapes the vaulted ceiling. It's popular, you see. A landmark, even. Kids swarm it, climbing onto its base and giggling at its ridiculous appearance. Families pose beneath it for goofy selfies. For a time, the depot even sold small, plush versions of it in the gift shop. Tourists bought them as a joke. A souvenir of that bizarre thing at the train station. For adults, it's just strange, harmless art. But the children, the young ones, they are different. They are the canaries in this cavernous coal mine. Some kids see the bear from a distance and freeze. They stop dead in their tracks, clutch their parents' hands tighter, and flat out refuse to get closer. No amount of coaxing works. They cry, they shake their heads, burying their faces in their parents' jackets until they are physically dragged away. They see something the adults have been trained to ignore. The uncanny is often most apparent to those whose minds haven't fully rationalized the world yet. This phenomenon, where children are more perceptive to non-physical presences, is a common theme in paranormal lore, suggesting an innocence that hasn't built up the necessary psychological defenses, a kind of psychic thinness of the veil. Then there are the other children, the ones who don't just see the bear, but seem to recognize it. They don't laugh. They don't point at it like a novelty. They wave. But it's not the exaggerated wave you'd give a statue or a mascot. It's small, intimate, a personal gesture, like greeting an old friend. And sometimes they whisper to it. A few years ago, I saw a little boy, maybe 5 years old, standing right at the base of the idol. His mother was engrossed in checking the fluctuating schedule board, completely distracted. The boy leaned in close, cupped his small hands around his mouth, and whispered something right into the crimson fabric of the bear's leg. Then he giggled, walked back to his mother, and tugged her sleeve. "It's okay, Mom," he said. "He won't take me." The mother, barely looking up, just nodded vaguely, grabbed his hand, and walked off. The next morning, the bear was facing slightly more to the left. A subtle shift, barely noticeable, the kind of thing you'd dismiss as faulty installation or a maintenance check. But those of us who work here, who are bound to the shift patterns and the endless quiet of the night, we noticed. And we know that the bear has moved just slightly to watch the exit where that little boy had left. It has shifted its focus. This leads to the second rule. It is a rule of distance, of absolute non-engagement. Do not stand near the red bear after sunset. Keep your distance. Do not let your bag or coat touch its base, and never linger too long. If you have to pass it, walk quickly, with purpose. You must not give it a reason to notice you. The shifting of the bear is unsettling, a quiet terror in plain sight. But what really confirms its unnatural state, what makes the blood run cold among the night crew, is the mouth. The bear's face is a typical cartoon grin, stitched tightly with thick black thread across the fabric. It's meant to look perpetually cheerful, an invitation to a photo opportunity. A night janitor, a quiet man named Elias, was the first to report it. He was mopping the slick tile near the ticket kiosks, glanced up, and saw the familiar, tight grin. He worked his way down the concourse, then circled back 10 minutes later, pulling his heavy cart. He looked up again, and the stitches were gone. Not ripped or broken, just missing, as if they had never been there at all. The red fabric around the mouth was slightly looser, a seam that was now marginally open. Not wide enough to be alarming, not enough to look like a tear, but fundamentally, sickeningly different. Elias stared for a long, agonizing moment. He packed up his supplies, left the depot without finishing his shift, and never came back. We found him a few days later, sitting at his usual corner booth in the pub, nursing a drink, staring at nothing. When one of the older workers asked him what he saw, why he quit so abruptly, Elias only whispered a single, terrified phrase. It yawned. That was the last anyone saw of Elias the unsettling fact that a large, inanimate object could perform a simple biological function, like yawning, speaks volumes about the nature of its consciousness. It's alive. But adhering to the physical limitations of its form, the thought is paralyzing. Despite the hidden terrors, the bear remains a perverse magnet for children. Parents click their photos. Toddlers reach out to touch its coarse red fur. And older children use its massive base as a tiny, temporary playground. But the children who linger, the ones who wave and whisper, sometimes they don't leave the station. Management, predictably, maintains a rigid silence about missing persons. There are no posters, no announcements, no articles in the local papers. But the workers, we know the grim cadence of the disappearances. It doesn't happen often, maybe once every few years. Just enough time for the city's memory to reset. A child standing too close, wandering off while their parents are distracted, slipping out of sight in the space of a single breath. And the cameras are useless. They will show the child standing near the idle one moment, and in the next frame, there's just a gap. No sign of them walking away. No image of anyone taking them. Just a literal void in the footage. Security sweeps the platforms, checks the tunnels, searches every locker and crevice in the depot, and they always come up empty. They never find a trace. But the bear always looks different after one of these disappearances. Subtle but chilling changes. The crimson fur around its open mouth, for instance, will appear matted and stiff, as if something wet and thick had dried there overnight, and the stitching on its belly seems to pull tighter, the seams taut, suggesting whatever is inside has shifted or grown. The historical record is littered with tales of folk monsters, particularly those involving dolls or toys that acted as receptacles for souls or life force. The golem tradition often explored this theme of manufactured life, imbued with a dark, secondary purpose. Researchers still argue whether the phenomenon of phantom hitchhikers is a modern take on these old, cautionary tales. But the bear, it's a silent feeder. A few days later, a contracted maintenance crew is brought in. The bear is cleaned, the fur brushed, the stitches reinforced. By the time the next wave of weekend travelers rolls in, it looks exactly as it always has. But the pattern is set. The ledger of absences has a new, terrifying entry, and the idol waits patiently for the next unsuspecting family to arrive. The most unsettling revelation about the bear came during one of those cleanups, after a particularly noticeable disappearance. It was late. The depot was virtually empty. The idol was looking conspicuously bad. The fur was stiff and discolored, and the stitching across its belly was actually beginning to loosen dramatically. Management, desperate to avoid any questions before the busy weekend rush, ordered an immediate, intensive refurbishment. The workers, a small maintenance crew, not the usual depot staff, arrived with tools, fresh batting, and new rolls of heavy fabric. The plan was simple. Open a discreet seam, pull out the old, compacted stuffing, fluff it up or replace it, and then meticulously sew it back up to look brand new. It was supposed to be a standard, boring task. The initial cut was made along the stitching line of the idol's belly. The seam gave way easily, and the workers reached inside. But they didn't find the expected, soft, gray stuffing. They didn't find foam or fabric padding. They found bones, small ones. The discovery was instantaneous horror. The bones were wedged deep inside the thick lining of the bear. Some were intact, others worn down, polished smooth, and fractured, as if they had been pressed tightly against something too large and too hard for too long. The bear, it turned out, was not just a statue. It was a kind of ghastly biological archive. But the horror didn't stop at the remains. Wires ran throughout the idol's frame. Rusted, thick wires, twisted and looping around the small, smooth bones, forced together with no structural pattern or logic, just a terrifying, tangled mass of aged metal and what used to be human. The idol's rigidity, its unnatural standing posture, was achieved not through steel infrastructure, but through this gruesome, macabre internal scaffolding. It's a literalization of the old European horror trope of the bone man, an entity animated and held together by the very remains of its victims. This suggests the bear isn't just a container. It's a grotesque, organic automaton. This is the point where the depot's complicity turns toxic. They didn't call the police. Not officially. The maintenance workers who made the discovery, those who didn't immediately quit and flee the city, kept their heads down. They finished the repair. They stitched the bear back up, sealing the secret inside its crimson fabric before the sun even rose. The next day, a fresh coat of bright, thick paint was applied to the exterior, just enough to distract the eye from the faded, stiff sections. By the time the first morning commuters rushed through the concourse, nothing appeared to have changed. The bear's silence, its sheer stillness, is the deadliest part. You can't reason with it. You can't appease it. You can only respect the boundary. So here's the rule that you, the temporary traveler, must follow. If you see a child staring at the bear for too long, take them by the hand and walk away. Do not give the idol a reason to shift its focus or to notice you. People imagine a haunting should announce itself with a drop in temperature, a spectral moan, or a visible warning. But that's not how it works here. The strange things sit in plain sight, blending in, waiting for someone to finally, terrifyingly, notice. That's how it is with the watchman. That's how it is with the bear. And that's how it is with the third and final object we need to discuss. The small, red wooden box in the lost and found. Now we step into the back offices. The part of the depot the public only interacts with when they realize they've left something vital, a wedding ring, a briefcase, maybe a forgotten child's toy. The lost and found is usually mundane. umbrellas from a forgotten storm, cheap souvenirs, the occasional wallet. Distracted people leave things behind, and the staff collects it all, storing it until it's eventually donated or tossed. It's a reliable, boring system, except for one thing: the red box. It's deep red, made of old wood, and has been tucked into the farthest corner of the shelving unit for as long as anyone who works here can remember. Its paint is dull with age, the surface worn smooth by decades of hands. No one knows who left it or when it arrived, but it has simply always been there. And it is never empty. It always has something inside. Sometimes it contains small, easily overlooked items. A perfectly tied single shoe, a rusty key that fits none of the depot's many locks, or a vintage photograph of a smiling family standing in front of an old locomotive. Other times, the contents are stranger. A ticket stub for a route that was decommissioned 60 years ago. A heavy pocket watch that still ticks with a rhythmic hush-hush, though it has no visible mechanism for winding, or a child's backpack filled with school books from a year no one can place. And sometimes there is money. Crisp, new bills or coins, so old their edges are worn smooth and the markings faded. At first, the workers assumed it was a prank. A little extra tip from a forgetful, wealthy passenger. A stroke of luck. But the truth, as always at the Obsidian Depot, is darker and far more transactional. This brings us to the third rule. It is the rule of exchange, of maintaining a cosmic balance within the depot's walls. The red box must never be empty. You are allowed to take what's inside. No one will stop you. But if you do, you must replace it with something else, not just any replacement. It must be something that you believe is equally valuable. It could be something small, a trinket from your pocket, a folded note, a button from your coat. The box isn't picky about the object, but you have to mean it. You have to believe, deep down in your quiet, rational mind, that you are making a fair trade. This concept is known in supernatural circles as the wager of the unseen. It's a core superstition in many cultures. The idea that certain artifacts, particularly those related to luck or fortune, demand a sacrifice or an equal trade to prevent the cosmic balance from tipping and invoking a worse penalty. Researchers still argue whether the perceived value of cursed objects is rooted in psychology or genuine paranormal power. But here, the value is always measured in belief. The older workers teach this rule to the new hires, a mixture of warning and grim superstition. Some nod along, play the game, and drop in a spare coin when they take an old pen. Others, the hardened skeptics, they just wave it off like a bad joke. But those are the ones you worry about, because eventually someone always decides to test the rule, convinced they can cheat the system. And the red box, it always decides what is fair. The quiet power of the red box lies in its patience. It waits for the truly cynical, the ones who think they are too clever for superstition. The last person who tried to break the rule was a new worker named Eddie. Like Mark, the victim of the watchman, Eddie handled baggage and platform clearing. He laughed at the watchman's stories, dismissed the bear as creepy art, and rolled his eyes at the idea of a haunted storage unit. He knew about the red box, of course. Everyone did. But he paid it no mind until one morning, while clearing out a forgotten haul of lost items, he finally pulled the box down from its corner perch. He ran his hand over its worn surface, knocked his knuckles lightly against the smooth wood, and gave it a small, mocking shake. Then he opened it. Sitting perfectly centered on the dark velvet lining was a single, pristine $100 bill. It was crisp, new, looking as if it had just been pulled from the bank vault. Eddie stared for a long time, the cynical mask of disbelief finally cracking into a smirk. He laughed, a short, disbelieving sound of pure luck. He held the bill up to the weak office light, checked the security stripe, and pocketed it. It wasn't fake. Later, when one of the older, wiser workers asked him if he'd made the required trade, Eddie just shrugged. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a mundane silver paperclip, and dropped it into the box. It made a small, pathetic tink against the wood. "There," he said, laughing. "Equal value. It was just free money waiting to be taken." No one spoke aloud, but a few of the older staff members shook their heads, and one muttered something low and refused to touch the box again. They knew. Eddie, meanwhile, didn't care. He had his $100 and his belief in his own cleverness. 2 days later, Eddie called in sick. Nothing to worry about. People get colds. They get stomach bugs. He missed his next shift, and the one after that. By the end of the week, his phone wasn't connecting, and his texts weren't receiving replies. Another week passed. No one had seen him. No calls, no sign, just a sudden, absolute void. No one knew what happened to Eddie, but crucially, no one touched the red box after that. The disappearance of the skeptic is a recurring motif in horror. But here, the exchange rate is what chills you. The box took the life, or the time, of the man who believed his mundane paperclip was worth $100. The object the box retrieves is always the difference between the trade and the true value of what was taken. In this case, it was Eddie's freedom, his continued existence. The rule is simple. If you take something, you give something back that you truly believe is a fair trade. If you don't, if you mock the exchange, the box will decide the fair value itself. And you do not want the red box to become your accountant. It's a collector of debts, and it values human life, or the memories that constitute it, very highly. The unnerving realization is that the box is likely stocked with the small, deeply cherished items of those whose debts it has already collected: the shoe, the old family photo, the ticking watch, the lost and found for everything that truly matters. The collective silence around Eddie's fate became the loudest warning the depot could issue. The red box went back into its quiet corner, its surface dull and waiting. The lessons of the watchman, the bear, and the box are always reinforced by absence, never by noise. It makes you realize that the psychological stress of knowing something is haunted is often more terrifying than the haunting itself. That's the core of what the term folly, adieu, or shared delusion means, where a reality is constructed purely from fear and rumor. And yet here, the effects are demonstrably physical. But these three entities, the watchman, the bear, and the box, they are not random. They are connected, operating in a slow, almost geological harmony. They are the gatekeepers, the archivists, and the escorts. They all point toward one final, most crucial element of the Obsidian Rail Depot, the destination that everyone denies exists. You look around the depot right now. You've memorized the floor plan. You know the platforms, the exits, the coffee stalls. You know there are 31 platforms. They are clearly marked on the maps, on the massive screens, and on the signs hanging from the ceiling. Every train that stops here belongs to one of those 31 lines. That's the official story. But if you take the long, cold walk past the active platforms and the abandoned storage areas, past the broken vending machines and the dusty benches, you will eventually find something else tucked away in a dark, rarely accessed corridor. There is an unmarked sign. The metal is halfway rusted, the lettering barely legible in the dim overhead light. It simply says, Platform 32. It's not on any official map. Ask any depot worker, and they'll give you the official line. It's under construction. It was closed years ago. You must be mistaken. Some will simply shake their heads and change the subject, their eyes flicking away from yours. The deeper truth is that no one wants to admit it's there, because Platform 32 is reserved for a very specific kind of traveler. These travelers don't look like the regular commuters. They aren't the ones rushing to work, texting their friends about weekend plans, or checking their watches nervously. They are different. They are old and young, sick and healthy, but there is always a quality of distance about them, like their thoughts are already halfway to another destination, a place they've long since accepted as inevitable. They arrive at the ticket booth. I've served a few of them myself over the years, and they pay for their journey, often in faded, old bills. They don't question it when they are handed a simple slip of paper with the number 32 stamped on it in neat, black ink. They don't seem concerned that the number is nowhere on the departure board. They walk through the depot, taking their time, their movements quiet and resolute. And somehow, without asking for directions, without looking lost for a single moment, they find the unmarked sign. And then they are gone. There is no record of a train arriving, no announcement over the aged PA system. Just a quiet part of the station where the air feels intensely still, where the fluorescent lights buzz faintly, and where the sound of the main crowd fades into a dull memory. The space is empty, but the traveler is absent. The silence of platform 32 is more profound than any noise could be. It's the kind of silence that suggests a massive intake of breath, a held moment before a final, inevitable action. You remember the old folklore about crossroads, how they are liminal spaces, meeting points not just of roads, but of worlds. The obsidian depot, built on a mass grave, with its watchman, its devouring idol, and its transactional box, is exactly that, a crossroad disguised as a municipal transportation hub. The rumors about Platform 32 are numerous and grim. Whispers about where the track leads, who gets on board, but the most persistent and terrifying rumor is about the man who drives the train, the conductor. If you're familiar with classic urban legends, you know that the Grim Reaper doesn't always appear as a skeletal figure in a cowl. The modern take, the psychological version, often suggests he blends in. He takes on ordinary, unassuming roles, immersing himself in the human world so he never forgets the complex, messy nature of mercy. He watches the worst of us, our greed, our cruelty, our destructive nature. But he also watches the best of us, our capacity for love, our desperate need to heal, our quiet acts of protection. Then, when the final time comes, he makes his call. The depot workers believe the conductor of Platform 32 is exactly that. The Reaper, just another man in a uniform, doing an odd, final job. There is no name for him on the depot payroll. There are no official records of his employment. None of the staff can recall ever having spoken to him or even seen him in the main offices, but sometimes, very late at night, when the depot is empty, they see a tall, lean man in a crisp conductor's uniform. He will be stepping onto a train that isn't supposed to be there. His uniform is dark, pristine, and his badge is perfectly plain. It holds just a number, 32. It's polished, gleaming under the faint, buzzing station lights. Then you blink or turn your head for a second, and he's gone, just another shadow, merged back into the structural gloom of the depot. The quiet dignity of the conductor is what truly unsettles me. There is no menace, no theatrical display, just a man doing his job. This reflects the old Germanic folklore of the wild hunt, where the psychopomp, the guide of souls, was often just a regular huntsman leading a spectral procession. The fear isn't in his power, it's in his neutrality. He simply provides the inevitable transportation. An eerie or odd fact often discussed in psychological studies of grief is the phenomenon of continuing bonds, where survivors report seeing, hearing, or feeling the presence of the deceased, sometimes in their ordinary work or transit environments, a subconscious attempt to normalize the finality of their departure. The conductor is the physical manifestation of that bond, the final, quiet delivery service. So, if you ever find yourself alone in the Obsidian Rail depot late at night, waiting for a train that is impossibly late, and you look down at the ticket in your hand to see the number 32 stamped on it. You need to remember the absolute final rule, and you need to be prepared to break every plan you've ever made. The quiet travelers with the 32 tickets rarely interact with the staff, but their silent journeys are the emotional core of the depot's darkness. They move with an unnatural acceptance, a resignation you rarely see in a place dedicated to movement and forward momentum. It's as if they've been waiting for this ticket, this final destination, all along. The act of finding platform 32 is never difficult for them. It's almost a moment of recognition. They will walk past the rushing crowd, oblivious to the announcements and the hurried footsteps, following some invisible internal compass. They don't look lost. They don't hesitate. They just know where they are supposed to be. I remember one instance, late one drizzly evening. A woman in her late 20s, neatly dressed, stood at my window. She was clutching a worn, vintage children's book to her chest, and she asked for a ticket. I gave her the standard service route. When she returned a few minutes later, the air around her was colder. She put a hand-stamped ticket on the glass. The number 32 was stark and black. She must have received it from one of the automated kiosks that occasionally malfunction, spitting out the wrong tickets to certain users. She didn't look concerned. She simply asked, "Which way is the long track?" When she walked away, I watched her. She moved with purpose toward the abandoned utility corridors. She passed the red bear, and I saw her pause, not in fear, but recognition. And she actually gave a small, almost imperceptible nod towards its vast, stitched face. She continued on, disappearing into the gloom. The profound silence that followed her passage was broken only by the faint hush-hush of a nearby pocket watch, not hers, but the one ticking inside the red box. The psychological impact of knowing your death is impending is often studied through the lens of terminal lucidity, where an individual close to death experiences a sudden, inexplicable period of clarity and peace. The travelers to platform 32 seem to be experiencing a version of this, not a return to clarity, but a final, absolute acceptance of their endpoint, which smooths their path to the unlisted platform. They aren't going to a train. They are going with the finality of their destiny. The train itself is rarely seen. It doesn't roll in with the screech of brakes or the flash of lights. It just is. It materializes in the silent corridor, a heavy, dark shape against the dimness. It waits only for its passengers. The moment the last person with a 32 ticket steps across the threshold and onto the platform, the train is gone. No blast of the whistle, no rumble of steel, just a deepening of the silence, and that brings us, inevitably, to the final, most crucial warning. The one that supersedes all the rest, the one that requires you to abandon all logic and reason and simply flee. This is the ultimate self-preservation rule in the Obsidian Rail Depot. You must be prepared to sacrifice your plans, your destination, and your entire journey to obey it. The stakes here are not just your life, but the fate of your soul, or whatever it is the conductor collects. You've heard the whispers now. The rules that govern the obsidian rail depot respect the watchman's shift, shun the crimson idol's gaze, and honor the red box's demand for a fair trade. These are the protections that allow the living to coexist, however nervously, with the things that do not belong. But the final rule is the most direct command, a simple binary choice with infinite consequences. Imagine you are standing here now in the late night quiet. The floor is cold through the soles of your shoes. The main concourse is empty, save for the distant, low hum of the ventilation system. Your train is delayed indefinitely, technical issues, maybe, or unscheduled maintenance. You feel that familiar, creeping sense of dread, the kind of psychological horror that comes from being truly, utterly alone in a massive, indifferent space. You check your ticket for the 10th time, and there it is. The ink is fresh, black, and perfectly stamped. 32. This ticket is an offer, a direct invitation from the conductor himself. It doesn't matter how you got it. Maybe you printed it yourself in a sleep-deprived daze. Maybe the machine genuinely malfunctioned. Maybe it was slipped into your pocket while you weren't looking. It doesn't matter where you were supposed to be going or what you were supposed to be doing. This is the absolute final command, the rule of survival. If you ever find yourself holding a ticket for train 32, don't get on. The instruction is unequivocal. Walk away. Forget your trip. Throw the ticket into the nearest recycling bin. Leave the station and do not look back. To step onto that train, to walk onto platform 32, is to accept the conductor's service. It is a final journey, and the destination is not one you can ever return from. The chilling reality is that the conductor is not collecting souls. He is merely transporting them to a final destination. This subtle distinction suggests that what he takes is not the essence of the person, but the final, exhausted body, which he delivers to the unknown end of the line. The reason you cannot look back is simple. The train is a momentary tear in the fabric of this reality. If you look back, if you try to witness the train's departure, you risk the possibility that the tear will not close properly, and the darkness of platform 32 will bleed out into the main depot, consuming everything. The human instinct is to document the strange, to understand the fear. But here, understanding is a terminal condition. The stories I've told you, the watchman, the bear, the box, they are all the depot's attempt to communicate this single, vital truth. There are limits to where you can go. The living belong to the 31 listed platforms. The others belong to 32. And the things that guard this place, they are there to make sure you stay on the correct side of the tracks. The ancient concept of the ferryman's obol, where a coin was placed in the mouth of the dead to pay the ferryman Karen, is the cultural echo of this final rule. The ticket to platform 32 is your fare. You must refuse the toll. You might wonder, has it ever happened to me? Have I, the seasoned narrator of this grim little travel guide, ever been offered the final journey? Yes, once. It was the night after Eddie disappeared, the skeptic who paid his debt with a paperclip. The depot felt heavy, suffocating. The silence was not peaceful. It was expectant. I was alone in the back office, filling out the endless, mundane paperwork that management requires to justify our existence. I had just finished logging a massive box of unclaimed umbrellas when I reached into my coat pocket for my pen, and my hand closed around something cold and stiff. It was a ticket, not the thin thermal paper we print, but a heavy cardstock stub, like something from an old opera house. It had a clean, perfect tear down the middle, like half a receipt, and stamped onto the surface, in that neat, unmistakable black ink, was the number 32. My heart didn't race. That's what's strange about this place. The fear here is deep, slow, and paralyzing. My mind, for a brief, terrifying second, went completely blank. I felt an overwhelming urge, a cold, quiet lure to simply get up, walk out of the office, and follow the ghost light of the watchman's lantern down the dark tracks. I wanted to see where the conductor's train went. I wanted to know. This impulse is a form of the call of the void, a recognized psychological phenomenon where individuals experience a sudden urge to engage in self-destructive acts, not driven by suicidal ideation, but by a brief disconnect with reality and an impulse to test the boundaries of existence. Researchers still argue whether this is an evolutionary warning system or a cognitive error. I stared at the ticket for what felt like an hour, the cold cardstock clinging to my palm. I could almost hear the low, smooth hum of the unseen engine. I could almost feel the presence of the conductor, not standing near me, but simply waiting further down the track. Then I remembered the watchman. I remembered the clean, precise absence of young Mark's head. I remembered the bones inside the bear. I remembered the sudden, total silence around Eddie's name. The depot's rules are not arbitrary. They are the price of continued presence among the living. And the ticket was a final summons to pay the ultimate price. I forced my hand to move. I walked stiffly out of the back office, across the main concourse, walking quickly past the silent, massive shape of the red bear. I walked to the nearest industrial waste bin, which reeked of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. With a shaking hand, I dropped the cardstock ticket into the bin. I felt a sudden, profound rush of relief, followed by a bone-deep cold, as if something had just released its grip on my soul. I didn't leave the station that night. I was too terrified that leaving would be seen as accepting the trade. Instead, I retreated to the ticket booth, locked the heavy metal grate, and waited for the first hints of sunrise, the first sounds of the living city arriving. I kept my gaze locked on the ticket slot, imagining the conductor standing there, looking in at me, and I did not look back. You see how it works now. The three main entities are not isolated spirits. They are components of a slow, integrated mechanism. The obsidian rail depot is an engine, and the watchman, the bear, and the box are its gears. The headless watchman is the scanner. He's looking for something he lost, but in his endless, looping patrol, he also identifies those whose grasp on the living world is already tenuous. The lost, the deeply grieved, the ones who walk around feeling like they're already half gone. These are the ones he passes close to. Lingering near them just a moment longer, he identifies potential passengers by their silence, their lack of acknowledgement. He is the initial census taker for platform 32. The red bear idol is the silent collector and the emotional siphon it draws in the vulnerable, the young, the ones whose innocence makes them more aware of the spiritual truth of the place. By collecting their remains and their lives, it fuels the latent energy of the depot, keeping the spiritual pressure high and the pathways open. Its primary function is to maintain the liminal state of the crossroads. The stiffness of the fur and the tightening of the stitches after a disappearance is the physical manifestation of this terrible energy transfer. The bear is not looking to travel, it is looking to stay and feed. And the red box is the ledger. It's the arbiter of fate and the final confirmation of a person's spiritual solvency. If you disrespect the laws of the depot, if you mock the trade, if you think you can take without giving something of equal, honest worth, the box records the debt. The debt isn't just money, the debt is you. It confirms the watchman's assessment. When the box collects a life, that life, like Eddie's, becomes a final, eligible passenger for platform 32. Ready for the conductor's service, the box issues the final, invisible ticket to those who have lost their balance. The strange, almost supernatural harmony of these three elements is often seen in systems of belief related to the morphe or fates in Greek mythology, entities that work in tandem to measure, weave, and cut the thread of life. Here, the watchman measures the thread's tension. The bear weaves the environmental energy, and the box acts as the cutter for those who choose poorly. The eerie fact is that in some folk traditions of the American South, a lost or forgotten object left in a public space can sometimes be a cursed item or a trick set out by a dark entity, requiring a specific ritualistic action, like an equal trade to prevent bad luck or a haunting. So when you see a traveler with that distant look, that absolute resignation, you can be almost certain that at some point they had a close encounter with one of these three elements. They were either too silent near the watchman, lingered too long by the bear, or failed the simple, sincere test of the red box. And now, as the night deepens, as the chill intensifies, and as your own delayed train remains stubbornly absent from the schedule board, you are left with the final, most terrifying question. Have you, while sitting here, already done something that has registered with the watchman, the bear, or the box? You've heard the story, and the depot has heard you listening. The time for stories is over. The silence in the depot is total. A thick, heavy blanket of soundlessness that only the deepest parts of the night can create. My shift is finally, agonizingly, coming to an end. It seems your train, the one you were actually waiting for, has finally pulled in. A genuine, scheduled train. The sounds of the tracks shuddering, the low hiss of the brakes, the sudden mechanical voice announcing your platform. It's a jarring return to reality. A noisy, blessed interruption to the paranormal quiet before you go, before you grab your bags and step back into the world of the living. Remember the rules. They are simple, but they are all that stand between you and the final cold ride on platform 32. The headless watchman, be respectful. If you see that sickly yellow flicker of the gas lantern down the track, a quick, polite good evening, or a simple nod is enough. Do not let him question his own reality. It's best to keep him searching. The red bear, maintain distance. Don't linger after sunset. Walk quickly when you pass it. And if you ever see a child staring at the idol, pull them away immediately. Do not give the bear a reason to notice you. The red box, never leave it empty. If you take anything, no matter how small or valueless it seems, replace it with something you truly believe is a fair trade. If you don't, the box will decide the payment for you. Platform 32. If you ever find yourself holding a ticket stamped 32, walk away. Throw it in the trash, forget your trip, and leave the station immediately. That train is not meant for you. The majority of people who pass through the obsidian rail depot never notice any of this. They rush to their gates, check their phones, sip their lukewarm coffee, and leave without ever looking too closely at the architecture of the place. That's their safety, their quiet, blessed ignorance. But now, you know better. The low, heavy whistle of your waiting train sounds again. A long, urgent blast. That's your call. The watchman is just now passing the far edge of platform 1, his light flickering weakly into the distance. You watch him walk, and you make sure, under your breath, that you mumble a low, sincere, "Safe travels, mate. Now grab your bags, step onto your train, and go wherever it is you need to be. The depot has released you, for now, and if you ever pass through here again, I'll still be here, watching, listening, collecting the next round of stories. Maybe we'll meet again sometime soon, and I can tell you a few more. Till then, have a safe trip. The tension eases, the cinematic imagery softens, and the aggressive sound design fades to a gentle, residual hum. You can let out that breath now. The train has pulled away from the platform, and the cold, heavy atmosphere of the depot is receding behind you. The warmth of the carriage is a sudden, welcome shock. The steady rhythm of the wheels on the track, a comforting, mechanical beat. You are moving forward, out of the darkness, and back into the normal world. That low, electrical thrum, the sound that felt like a predator's purr back in the depot, is now just the expected sound of technology and transport. The stories are closed behind the carriage doors. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through the Obsidian Rail Depot. Thank you for listening so closely, for keeping the light low, and for being brave enough to hear the rules. Remember, sometimes the safest thing you can do is simply acknowledge the world around you, even the parts that refuse to be seen in the light. Now, relax. Let the steady movement of the train lull you. Your own story, the one you are actively writing right now, is far from over. End of script. Sleep peacefully if you can. End of script. Sleep peacefully if you can.